2021 Winter Partner Convening. Excited to continue on the shared journey for equitable well-being. And I know that folks are settling in, still getting logged on. And as you do, we'd invite you to join us in the chat, share your first name, your organization, and your pronoun. As one of our sort of tech touch points, as you all log on and think about keeping yourselves on mute when you're not actively sharing today. And like I often do, also remember to take yourself off of mute when you're looking to add as you jump into the conversation throughout our time together today. We'll be spending the next 2.5 hours together, and we'll take one break about halfway through. And for anyone who finds themselves having technical difficulties today, Cassie with a K is our lead tech guru for the day. And in the drop-down menu, you'll find by her name a couple of tools. So you know that she will be pulling from her toolbox to help you stay connected and whatever else you may need. We will record the session today so that for those who couldn't be with us sort of in person, that they can be able to listen back. And one of the lessons we've learned is that if you need to be joining by phone and you find yourself needing to step away or be called away, rather than putting us on hold, if you wouldn't mind dropping off, taking care of what's needed and then rejoining us. That'll help us avoid any background music. Next slide, if you would, please, Elizabeth. Awesome. We definitely know that time is precious. I think many of us probably bumped into an article even in the last week that said that we're finding ourselves working an extra hour a day. So just acknowledging that we've off to a good start and starting on time, and we will absolutely end on time together today. Your presence with us is so appreciated, and for those who are able to stay connected via their video screens, just really helps support our ongoing relationship building. And as we're again sitting sort of in this virtual room and space exchanging ideas. Also recognizing that we're living the pandemic life, and that often means we're sharing our spaces with pets and other people in our lives and on perhaps some limited bandwidth. So we certainly understand it as needed for you to, again, turn off your camera or to step away, and we'll look forward to you rejoining us. There'll be a number of opportunities today to share in small groups and in large group, as well as to be active in the chat. You all do such a tremendous job with those enriching conversations, and look forward to what is lifted up today. As you're in your small groups, I know that some folks are comfortable jumping in right away, and there are others who like to take a moment to reflect, to gather their thoughts, and just inviting folks to make space and look forward to lifting up everyone's voice. And as we go forward today, really wanting really looking to encourage us to test new ideas, to take risks together, being rigorous on ideas and gentle on people. Looking forward to today's conversation. And with that, handing it over to Liz.
Great, thank you so much, Stacy. And I'm just gonna, like, even though this is being recorded, I'm gonna tell you, I have like a sneeze that's waiting to come. So I'm gonna try really hard to get through this without sneezing into all of your ears. Just again, you kind of joining Stacy and welcoming everybody. Really appreciate that you're all here. 12 months ago, we had our last in-person partner convening, and we have been dependent on Zoom technology for our sessions since then. And so we are going to try to optimize what we can do kind of in this virtual environment, trying to make this interactive and continuing to just foster the fact that a lot of what we're after is you all kind of intersecting with each other. Um, so hopefully we'll be able to do that both today and on Friday. So thanks so much for joining us. I do want to start with our land acknowledgement statement. So hopefully that can get pulled up. And Hillary's going to put it in the chat box as well. That we begin by acknowledging with humility that the land where we are today is the territory of the people of the Salish Sea. Their presence is imbued in the waterways, shorelines, valleys, and mountains of the traditional homelands of the Coast Salish people since time immemorial. And there is a link to a website that's maintained by the University of British Columbia that allows you to go and you can put in, any zip code and learn about, either the place where you are today or someplace in the past or someplace that's important to you. For many people on the North Sound team, we're sitting up here in Bellingham, in the traditional homelands of the Lummi and Nooksack people, and just hope that you all will take a chance to see where you are and maybe even stick that in the chat box if you get a chance to do that, so that we continue to just acknowledge in this virtual world we are in a lot of places and just honoring the people and the land that came before us. We also want to share
Idaho, and for our state update.
Okay, I'm not sure who that was, but that. So the other thing that we wanted to share with you, we have been working probably for the last year and a half or so with Children of the Setting Sun, and have created a print document. And again, Hillary's going to put the chat for that in the chat box. Something that you can use if you're trying to work within your own teams or your own communities to develop a land acknowledgement statement. And, it's been so amazing to have this partnership with Children of the Setting Sun. So really grateful for the work that they've done on this. And then, just kind of to get us started, we're again really grateful to the team from Community Initiatives. I think we've been working with them since the summer of 2019. They've just stepped in and have been helping us think through how we can optimize some of our partner meetings and partner engagements. So just really grateful, Monty and Stacy, that you all are on today, and other members of the team, and the work that you've been doing, with us. And over the next couple of days, we're going to be talking about a number of things and discussing stewardship, equity, like what does recovery mean, and moving towards equitable well-being. And we're going to be trying to kind of interweave. We have a board learning session tomorrow before we do the second part of our partner session. We're going to be trying to weave some of those themes together, and you guys will be the test of like how well we do. But it's going to be kind of fun for us to see how we can connect those. So with that, Monty, I'm going to turn it back to you and help get us started.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Liz, and good afternoon, everyone. We're grateful, Stacy, myself, Elizabeth, and Marquez, Fraser may be on the call too, to just be on this journey with you. It really means a lot to us, and just start by commending you all and thanking everyone for showing up. Just thinking back, Liz, when we were last together, January, it's been a really wild and rough ride in so many ways for our country and for our communities. And, I just want to say, however you all are showing up in a group this size, we're showing up in different ways and probably varies from day to day, but there may be folks here that are carrying some extra heavy burdens. And just want to say that we're really glad you're here and appreciate how this partnership has really showed some gracious space to each other. There's some really deep relationships here, and I want to make sure that that's the same space that we kind of create for the next couple of days. Our team likes to say, come as you are, but don't leave as you come. Basically meaning that, that we're here, there's opportunities to learn from each other, to gain insight, to maybe reclaim perspective from each other, to say something that might lift somebody else up, or hear something that lifts you up. So again,
Yeah.
really glad that you all are here on that front.
Yeah, Monty, and if I could just say one thing, just because of this thing that's up on the screen right now, you know, I look at the organizations that are represented by these icons, and everyone is burdened more than they were 12 months ago. And at the same time, I can't think of a group that's on this slide who hasn't shared something with us that they have done that has not nourished us with just like recognizing how much people have done, the different ways that they've leaned into the pandemic. Partly I see like all the work and the burden, but I also just see like amazing. There are just times when I just go like, wow, you guys have made my day with the things they've shared. So just wanted to toss that in there.
Yeah, thank you, Liz. Yeah, this journey from kind of this Medicaid transformation, which necessarily has some transactional elements, to this network that has possibilities that transcend even that important work of the Medicaid transformation funding that you received, I think is really exciting to see how that's blossoming. And again, this day is, this is your agenda, and I want to kind of give a shout out. What's been prepared for you has been prepared by your partners, trying to channel what they think the broader partnership would be interested in. So I hope I hit everybody. I think Holly Martinson and Cedric Johnson and Yuki Yang and Linda McCarthy and Jackie Julian and Evan Holland and a bunch of the North Sound staff have poured time into thinking about what would make a Zoom meeting like this most meaningful. And, so we have a kind of a bit of a game plan, and it's on the screen in front of you. And that first piece is, we're going to have a little bit of a panel and start to unpack what does equitable recovery look like in the context of a global pandemic that is halting the economy and revealing, legacies and centuries long systemic inequities that is true for all parts of our country and uniquely manifest here. And so what does recovery really look like with an equity lens? And we're going to spend some time in a very related fashion. And I think Daryl Hillier is going to be here with us, who all of you know, with Children of the Setting Sun, and with his leadership to kind of kick us off in a discussion around what does stewardship look like for us within this network now and beyond. And then towards the end of the day, we're going to do a light touch on really how we're understanding, measuring, and really improving well-being from an equity lens. And so have a little bit of a tool that we just want to tee up towards the end of the day. And we may have a little bit of a stretch break in between. But on this note of stewardship, I want to just invite some voices, all of your voices in, actually, just to kind of get us warmed up. And there is no one right definition for stewardship. One of our partners at Rethink Health, who some of you know that may be doing some work in the North Sound at some point, kind of pulls out a couple of these ideas around, this responsibility for taking responsibility for forming relationships with you all are on a strong path to doing. And, I think stewardship means crossing the boundaries, and particularly sometimes those boundaries that divide us, and really seeing ourselves, but particularly our organizations and our work in a little bit larger purpose than just kind of our immediate mission only statement, as important as that is, and kind of really thinking through how we share power and how we build wealth and all types of wealth and those investments. So that's just a couple of ideas I would seed, but there's no right or wrong here. And what I'd like to invite you in is in twos and threes to kind of be thinking about, maybe on this next slide, what stewardship, from your perspective, when you think about it, what is stewardship? What is it? And what does it look like? And who or what comes to mind, when you think about stewardship? So who and what comes to mind? And then what specifically are practices or things that you are modeled when you think about that? So in just a moment, you're going to be transported into a pair partnership for about 5 minutes. Maybe make that 4 minutes, and then we'll come back. What is stewardship? What comes to mind?
Sorry, folks that came in late, I'm gonna have to assign you rooms real quick. So just give me a sec.
If you can't assign me a room, no worries, if it's easy.
Did you just jump on, Monica?
Anyway, for being patient.
It's pretty vast.
Okay, I guess we're leaving.
Yeah.
Oh,
We're leaving.
All right.
That was abrupt.
I just got a glimpse of Diane Smith's cat. I love it. So I just invite you, we're going to pick up this thread of stewardship a little bit later in the meeting. But if there are any ideas, would love to hear a couple of your thoughts. If you want to just chat in a couple of words or phrases or things that came up as you all were thinking about what stewardship looks like, what it means, or an example of that. Would love to see some of those coming up in the chat. And I know we are a large group, but if there's somebody that feels really strongly or is bold enough to want to say, hey, I have something I'd like to put out for the group before we pivot over to the panel, I'll just keep that open for a second. There's something that came out of your pair share around stewardship you'd like to put out to the larger group. I may just call on Heather McGinnis if she is willing to just speak into the piece that she just talked about for us.
Sure. Yeah, we talked about how stewardship isn't often a word that we think about in the context of our work, but usually hearing about it in the context of environmentalism or even like a religious church type context. But thinking about how it really comes back to service and thinking about how you're caring for something outside of yourself, whether that's an ecosystem or a community or a person, and really nourishing it, caring for it, and helping it flourish.
Great. Thank you for that. And seeing Kelly, just this idea of culture, and David, thinking about people on the ground and providing the direct services when designing systems, Kelly, did you have one that you're trying to get in there? Kelly, your Baker name just popped up, so I was just seeing if you wanted to get a word in before we pivot.
Yeah, I think that it is just a matter of taking great care of people, culture, money, land, anything that is entrusted to us as best we possibly can, and caring for, including education and teachings, and carrying forward those teachings to others in a positive manner.
Thank you for that. Yeah, that trust that jumps out at me. So again, this is a down payment on a conversation that we can continue to have. And I notice our Ben Young, just this idea of our immediate focus needs to be on the pandemic. And I think probably a lot of folks on this call would agree. And how do we do that from an equitable perspective? And so that's exactly what we're going to jump into. And I think there's probably some stewardship threads in there around thinking about how we design this and how we care for the others and the kind of the challenges that are right in front of us. So to guide us through that, Evan, I'm looking for you, but Evan.
I'm here.
You're here, great. I will let our friend from Seed Collaborative take it from here. Thanks, Evan.
Awesome. Thank you, Monty. And good afternoon, everyone. So happy to be here with y'all. I see lots and lots of familiar faces and lots of new faces, so that's exciting as well. My name is Evan Holland, and I am a consultant and co-founder of Seed Collaborative. And we're a consulting company really focused on thinking about equity and organizational development. And we've been hanging out and working with North Sound for some time now. And so I'm really excited for this conversation. I have been thinking about care a lot in all kinds of spaces, including my own household and my own family and my own community. And so just not only excited for the topic, but really excited for our very lovely panelists, some of my favorite people to work with, Liz Baxter from North Sound, Jackie Julian from Communities of Color Coalition, and Holly Martinson from Lydia Place. So But before I let them introduce themselves and hop into some of our discussion around self-care versus community care and how that all relates to equitable recovery and how that might look, just want to offer a few thoughts to sort of kick us off, and then I'll kick it to our panelists, if that sounds good for folks. I see Marty shaking his head. Yep, sounds good. All right. So in thinking about care and think in recent time, there's been lots of writers and organizers and activists and social media personalities talking about self-care and how maybe it's not enough and maybe we need a bit more and really thinking about how our societal norms and messages regarding stress, regarding being sleep deprived and exhaustion, work-life balance, have really, the response from our sort of environmental messages have really been self-care. So, go to the gym, take a nap, take a bubble bath, find ways to deal with your issues of stress on your own, right? But I really think it's important, particularly as we think about equity from a societal standpoint and bringing about a more equitable and a more healed community, that we understand and remember that our country's ideas of work, our country's ideas of stress, our country's ideas of exhaustion are really rooted in some historical oppression and really to take that even further, some original founding ideas around white supremacist ideology in this country. And happy to explore that more, but really, as we think about adjusting our status quo to really come into new ways of thinking and new ways of being and doing and bringing about more equitable society, I think it's so important to think about our collective stress, our collective healing as really a community issue. And that is, a critical frame, I think, for thinking about equitable recovery, thinking about the ways in which our systems and structures haven't been serving us and how they can do better. And so, just really want us to open our mind and think about new ways of bringing care into spaces that historically haven't been places where we think about care and healing, such as our workplace and such as community spaces. And so, yeah, those are some of the ideas that we'd love to explore with y'all today and figure out with y'all today. So I want to go from there to our panelists and just ask them to introduce themselves and talk about what community care is versus self-care, and look at why it's important to think about that and how we can bring these new frames around community care into our organizations and our community. And would love to start perhaps with Holly. Please introduce yourself and ask that question, and then go to Jackie and then go to Liz, if that's okay with y'all.
Yeah, sounds good. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Holly Martinson, and I am with Lydia Place in Bellingham. I'm a mental health clinician and a substance use disorder professional, and I provide mental health counseling services to individuals who have experienced or are currently experiencing homelessness. And so I had a lot of ideas about community care. So I was really trying to get it into some coherent thoughts here in a few minutes. So, when I think of community care, I think about social support and social network. And I think this is a really core element of something we've been talking about a little bit of resilience, which is really just our ability to successfully navigate, adverse experiences that we all go through in life. We need to fill up our cup, so to speak, and it's important to fill up others. We are social beings. We can't do it all on our own. And I think this looks really different depending on a lot of different factors, including just what we feel like we need at the time. And having that social support is going to be, and is currently, a large part being able to weather this storm, particularly of this pandemic and the associated trauma with that. Not just the trauma we experience now in the midst of it, but the compounding trauma we experience after. And so something that I was reflecting on is the importance of this social support, this community care in the workplace, particularly for those of us that work with some of the most vulnerable and marginalized in our communities. And in my agency, that is who we work alongside. The work that we do is challenging at any time, and particularly difficult right now, as the need for resources is so high and they seem so scarce. We work hard and burnout is really common. That emotional and physical fatigue, it takes a toll, not only professionally, but also personally. So I was thinking, like, what is one example that I can share from my workplace that has seemed to work. And one thing that came to mind first was our, and going back a little bit, just how do we embody this concept of community care in our agency? And I thought about our mental health team. We've been able to carve out time each week for our peers to come together to process and connect as an agency. And, we usually have come with a topic to discuss, but we also have just left it open to process whatever people have to bring in the space. A large part of this focus was asking, what do we feel like we need from each other and how can we support one another? This was a really encouraging thing to be a part of and see, because even in that space, there was like other kind of support groups that branched off from that. Like some people would branch off into morning coffee hours every week and just spend time talking about whatever. We also practice mindfulness exercises together as a group, and I felt like that was just a really rich and nourishing thing for us to share together. And even in that, there were some challenges. It can be hard to get buy-in for people to carve out that time out of their day to attend. But I think that just intentionally setting aside that time really set a tone with our agency that we care about and that we want to care for each other. And also that I felt encouraged that I had the space and the freedom to share what I needed, and also share challenges and struggles that I've gone through and that I'm going through. And this was paid time. We didn't have to do, this wasn't before, after, during a lunch break. And I think that's really critical and really important, is that we got paid to do this, to take care of ourselves. And I think that really sent a positive message. So really kind of just that intentionality and that investment in and from our communities, our agencies, to foster that community care, I think is really going to build that social support and in turn build resiliency.
Nice. Thank you, Holly. And before I go to Jackie, I just have one quick follow-up question. So I'm interested to know how the idea was initially introduced into the organization to bring about spaces for healing at work, right? Which is oftentimes thought about as something you do after work. Like you said, you could figure it out on your own time at lunch or on your break, but like how that came into the organization initially, and maybe like what that was like briefly, and how did it become a norm at work? Because it sounds like you all have been doing it for a while, and although some may not participate, but it's grown the idea of taking care of each other with these branch off groups and coffees and teas and that type of thing. So really interested in how it came in and then how it evolved over time.
There was consistent messaging from staff. A lot of it was feeling guilty for not being productive. That's where it started from. And so we wanted to normalize that and, really hammer home that that's part of the difficult times we're going through right now, and that's okay. And so we thought a good way to do that would be to focus kind of on how we can take care of ourselves, but also the importance of connecting and really getting ideas from each other and having that space. And it's interesting you say, how has it evolved? So there's still the coffee hours and the things that had branched off of that, but the actual group doesn't exist anymore. interestingly enough, but it was, I think it was still successful in that people kind of were able to do their own little groups in that. So yeah.
Absolutely, because community care can look a lot of different ways. And it's not a stagnant. It doesn't have to look a stagnant way. So I love the idea that it's evolved and changed into ways that work for folks in Lydia Place. That's so awesome. Thank you for sharing. I want to go to Jack. I could ask more questions about that, but I want to bring in our other two panelists. And would love to go to Jackie Julian with Communities of Color Coalition. And I have the same question, Jackie, if you could just introduce yourself and talk to us about your thoughts on community care versus self-care and how to bring it into spaces where it doesn't normally, hasn't historically been, places in the community, places like work, and that type of thing, and how it comes out in the open for folks to gain greater healing. So Jackie Julian.
Yeah, good afternoon and thank you. Jackie Julian, Executive Director for Communities of Color Coalition. We're based in Snohomish County. And thank you, Holly, for sharing that and just giving us an overview. Just to support the difference for me, one, COVID exposed me to realize, as I talk about self-care, how much that is so anchored, one, in individualism. Sometimes, right, it's an act of resistance as far as being aware, but self-care as a whole, before COVID, for me, like I'm an artist, so I like to paint, so like buying materials, or whether, I'm doing activities, COVID happened, I'm like, well, I need to be mindful of taking care of myself. So let me engage in other ways. So here I am, in my 40s, buying some skates, but this is self-care, right? I have to keep my energy up. And for me, what started happening was realizing how that is a privilege, to be able to, one, it is expensive to care for yourself in a manner when we think about wellness as a whole, to have the things to our disposal to be able to engage in a way that others don't. I had to reflect and sit with that. Self-care for me now is more what Holly shared, is that mindfulness, being mindful of how trauma is stored in my body, where it's stored, what are some things that I do right to combat that. And so sometimes it's a daily inventory for self-care, right? Sometimes it's a quote, it's a mantra, it's a song, it's a dance in the middle, on the sidewalk. It could be many things. I wanted to share, like for me today, just in leading this conversation, it was like, what is that word? What is that affirmation? And I'll share this because it's different for many different folks. But it's a quote from Audre Lorde, and she says, I have to come to believe that what is most important to me must be spoken, made verbal, and shared, even at the risk of having it bruised or misunderstood. So those are different, right? Those are daily things for me, things that work for me. Shifting to community care, also be what Holly mentioned, is a lot of the times we as individuals don't realize how we perpetuate a system, how we contribute to white supremacy culture as a whole. And so being mindful of like those daily practices. Holly mentioned, the enormous guilt of not doing enough. And not, I think, we think, because we are in this system, like we have to produce. For me, in my conversations with community and recognizing that, I'm an advocate dedicated to system change. And so part of that stewardship is creating a system, right, for those that are mostly impacted. And there's a large part of that is the acknowledgement, is that, from sun up to sun down, historically, that's how our bodies have been viewed as a mass production to maintain a system that excludes us. And so our conversations look different. For us, community care has been a number of things. It's a collective action. It's intentionally creating a communal space for healing, recognizing the ways in which systems have purposely left us out. One of the things that we're doing for community care as far as like offering to staff and larger community, and I will share out to this whole group because it's open for our region, is having an art therapist. So free to the community. It's going to be a 10-week, they'll be in 10-week sessions. Art supplies will be provided. And it is for those that have been historically traumatized. When we talk about trauma, like pandemic is trauma. And so how we go about addressing one, the inequities that we know are in existence, but also understanding and realizing that we as individuals collectively are processing death and hurt and destruction at like unhealthy rates, it's unimaginable rates. I mean, like we don't get to talk about those things, right? When we're at work. And so it's recognizing that collectively, how we care and support one another in this process makes the difference. And so I think, one of the beautiful things is that we have a consensus, right? We all recognize that we're in pain. And so we get to shift and make what the world that we need. So that's in short, right? Some of the things as far as like the difference between self-care and community care. I think just in, when we started this talking about stewardship, some of the things I heard was a collection of, how we care for one another in this work, because realizing like it's not light, no matter where we are in our understanding, like the work is heavy. So having care and compassion as we work to understand and hold space. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. That so many beautiful nuggets there. I heard a little bit of like courage to care for yourself no matter where you were, whether it's dancing in the street or whatever you needed to do to take care of yourself. So I just want to lift that up, and heard that it sounds like through your work through Communities of Color Coalition, you're saying, okay, this is a community need and how can we step up to make space for community? And so I love that example, and dovetailing that example with Holly's example of how we bring care into our organization as something that we do together because we know we need it. And so I just want to say thank you for that, and shift the conversation to invite Liz Baxter from North Sound into it, and ask Liz to introduce herself and talk about self-care versus community care, and what that looks like for you, perhaps what that looks like at North Sound, or other ideas that you may have come across around that. And I think I saw Liz, so I know I'm gonna guess that she's here. And invite Liz.
Here.
Liz is here. Hello, Liz. There's 90 whole people and I couldn't find you, but I see you now. So please introduce yourself and talk about self-care versus community care, and how that looks for you in your work, in your organization, outside your organization, and community.
Yeah, thanks, Evan. And, following both Holly and Jackie it's interesting because there were some common themes that came up for some of the thoughts that I had. So I'm gonna bounce a little bit, because I think of individual care and community care definitely falling into that both and. Like, how do we make space for both of those things to happen? But I think that for me, it's recognizing that when I talk about community, that, we might think of that as in a singular way, but really we're a collection of communities. There's like a lot of different communities that are at play. So I can think about the fact that, I think there's like 36 people in my immediate family. It's a community, and trying to find ways to take care and provide opportunities in there is one thing. I have this team at the ACH, and how, really working in partnership with Nicole, how we've tried to come up with different strategies. And again, just echoing some earlier comments, I think that what we've acknowledged always at the outside, God, we're never going to be able to do enough. So we're going to be doing some things, but it's never going to be enough of, it's not going to meet the needs, but it's going to help folks know that they are remembered, they're recognized, we care about them as human beings. We care about our partners. So, this group of people I'm staring at right now are kind of another layer of community. But if I then take a step back, I might be thinking about community as like, who are the people of color that I interact with? Who are the indigenous lives that I interact with? Because the impacts of COVID are so different. And, coupled with all of the other things that are going on. I'm in community with the LGBTQ plus community. That's like a whole nother layer of community that I interact with. And so we have all of these different layers of things. And sometimes it's about making sure that I'm present and I'm listening. Sometimes it's about my voice. Sometimes it's actually like blankets, food, and water. Sometimes it might be like money. Can we like push money onto the table to show our investment in community? And it's like this constant churning to try and find different ways. I mean, in some ironic way, it might come back to targeted universalism, um, that I want to be engaged and supportive of community, but depending on who I'm talking about, my strategies might be different. And but it is this notion, and so here's the metaphor. You've all heard this metaphor, but I'm going to use it anyway. And it's, when you're in the airplane and they say, always put your mask on before you put the mask on of your kid or something, which is so counterintuitive. I mean, it's just like, it goes against every bone in our bodies. But it is this belief that in order for public health to keep working on the 245th day in a row, they got to be taking care of the people who work in public health. And so my job is to figure out, so how can I take care of the people who are taking care of the people in public health? And so we have to have the individual care, but we can't do it alone. So I can be like the best self-care person, which I'm not, but I can be the best at it, but I cannot do it alone. And so how we think about ourselves in community, in some collective space where if I know that I'm doing the best I can do for myself, but I also know there are 5 or 6 people out there who've got my back, that's going to help my self-care. I just think that, it is this combination of what do we do for ourselves and how do we all take care of each other. And so I'm going to end.
You're a little bit frozen, Liz. So we'd really love to hear that last thought. Chatting so I can buy your internet time to catch up with the rest of us. And if it doesn't, then we'll just make
And
sure.
with thing I learned traveling with my friend to South Korea, the things in the street holding hands. Doesn't matter, not typical in the United States. And she said, in first grade, kids are taught philosophy. They are taught philosophy throughout elementary school. And one of the tenets in Korean society, your responsibility is to take care of the person next to you so that they can take care of you. And it just was like this amazing thing to watch carry out in real life. So, I just think of the individual and community as being so intertwined. If we can keep that in mind, we'll get better at both. So I'm going to pause there.
Thank you, Liz. You broke up a little bit, but just to sort of reiterate some of the themes that I think are so important that what you talked about, put your mask on before you take care of others. I talk to my son often about hurt people, but healed people can help heal others. And so I totally agree and love that you brought up, but let's make sure we're taking care of ourselves, even though we know that community care is so important, and find ways to just recognize that though we may be different, we're all sort of dealing with some of the same stressors, some of the same pressures, and how do we help to take care of each other in different ways and push resources, make time, make space in ways that are applicable to what is needed right in front of you, and bringing in that idea of targeted universalism, which is if you have an overall goal of making sure all are cared for, how can you show up for different people in different communities in different ways, in the ways in which they need care? And I love that that you brought that up. That really resonates. So I want to shift us to start to think about equitable recovery and what that might look like and how that connects to community care. And thinking about equitable recovery, is equitable recovery really what we're shooting for as it relates to bouncing back from COVID, and the societal effects it's had on all of us? And you know, what it looks like, is it enough? And thinking about, you know, carrying this idea of community care forward. And some of the things that came up for me as y'all were talking included, you know, an equitable society, and you know, drilling down into equitable recovery. I think what really needs to be a part of that is being able to bring our whole selves to the spaces that we dwell in. And when we do that, we can better ask for help, better find ways to create communities of care. And that maybe that's a part of equitable recovery, or perhaps we need to go further. And so just want to put that out there and see if that really resonates with folks, and if any of our panelists want to speak to equitable recovery and what it means, and is it enough? And
yeah, I'm happy to jumpstart this one, you know, because I think that we often talk about, and just like do this if I start to break up. So I put recovery in air quotes like all the time, because I think that if I had a broken leg and I was recovering from a broken leg, I would know that I was recovered because I was fully functional and nobody can see the fracture on my x-ray anymore or something like that. You can tell I'm not a clinician. So I am so concerned that we are narrowly defining recovery to be, when do we get to be in a restaurant, go to a movie theater again? Like, we're going to check off the box that somehow we've done recovery. And we're not going to recognize communities disparately impacted 12 months ago and more. And where are they 12 months from now? And so for me, I wish we had a different word to be talking about. We've kind of been like devastated. How do we figure out how to bring everyone forward? And recovery, just it's such a challenging language for me to try and sort through that, because it's not adequate to think about recovery. I think it is, how do we actually create the framework and the capacity for communities to get back to some semblance of being able to see where they can get to well-being? Do they have the assets in place? And that might mean we're investing more in some communities than in others, because they were just further back than others were 12 and a half months ago. That's my jumping off point.
thank you, Liz. I appreciate that jumping off point, because I agree. Maybe recovery isn't enough, because I think what we learned in 2020, a lot of us, maybe for the first time, or for some of us, maybe we were reminded of it, is that there is so much inequity in our society. And 2020 was really one of those flashpoints where people found their voice around talking about our societal systems and structures being, you know, in a lot of ways inherently inequitable. And so to return to a status quo, to return to that equity, almost feels violent, almost feels like, why would we return to trauma, right? And I know Jackie talked about trauma quite a bit in our conversations, and heal and finding ways to heal from that trauma. So perhaps I'll go to her next, but really interested in exploring how can we reach beyond the status quo of what life was like prior to COVID and prior to the year that was 2020, and think about how we bring about a more just society and a more healed society, and build ourselves up in the process to have the tools and resources we need to do that. And perhaps I can take it to Jackie and then Holly. Perhaps we can dream a little about what reaching beyond the status quo looks like when we think about equitable recovery.
Thank you, Evan, and thank you, Liz, for framing that. I'm just going to be dropping quotes at you all. One, because as Liz mentioned, right, how do we bring everyone forward? Which reminds me of an African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone, right? If you want to go far, go together. And that's what we are doing collectively. I think for me, when I think about recovery, and in terms of equity work, what does that mean? It means repair. And so one, I will say, as you mentioned, Evan, is that yes, my work is not only as a survivor with lived experiences, there's a weight, right, in carrying and being responsible and acknowledging that the work that I do is to advocate and to change social conditions for those that have been oppressed. So forgive me if my words are disorganized. I feel that sometimes there's this unrealistic expectation that trauma is to be delivered in a handful of honey. It's supposed to be soothing, not only to our ears, but to our hearts, to help us feel better, right, in this work of recovery. And that's not the case. I think that we need to sit with some hard truths. And in order to do that, we have to understand that there is a system in place that has maintained the protection and care and the extension of compassion for individuals. One, again, it maintains white supremacy culture, but it protects those in leadership. Just when I think about, recovering and being anchored in those hard truths, is that as leaders, we're allowed to say, this is a learning opportunity, or this is, moving forward, we need to do better. What's not explored or talked about is that when we have these learning opportunities, it's at the expense of others. And at that expense is where our effort should focus to do that repair work, that recovery work, to acknowledge that, we have an important role. And so by acknowledging those, it's us willing to make repair. And so for me, that's how I frame that. One, I think that, in this conversation, I think what's helpful is that, as Liz mentioned, is investing sometimes that, it looks different in many ways. And sometimes it could be supporting communities that have been intentionally left out, but also having the conversation and collectively understanding that in this work, we don't have room for guilt or shame. We all inherited a system. And so what we do as individuals is going to, play a huge part on how we work together in this. And so I think that in that, again, understanding we're all experiencing trauma, and also understanding we're situated different. And so for me, in that being situated different, therefore our goal is wellness, right? We've been leading with this work of wellness and understanding, what does that really mean, framing that? And so I think that it's okay to say that, if wellness is our goal and how we get there, it's going to be okay if my plan is individual to me, right? But collectively, we all have individual, if we're situated different, we all have different needs. And so understanding that is really, is the recovery work itself.
Thank you, Jackie. I really appreciate the piece you say that, we're all affected by the place we live in, the systems and structures in which we live in. That includes, I think, me personally. I'm always thinking about how I can, do better and be better, and think about how the American oppressive culture has seeped into my own bones, and how I can find ways to think about it and excavate it, and that we're all figuring out how to sort of build the ship as we sail, right? And I really appreciate that, because I think it's so important to know that you can care about equity and care about healing without being an expert in either, or out without really understanding or knowing either. You can say, I think this is important. I think we need to figure it out. We need to learn about it. We need to grow around it. And then in order for us to be able to really serve community in the way that is maybe even better for the folks both serving community and those being served. So thank you for that, Jackie. Really appreciate that. I want to go to Holly now and see how she wants to add to this conversation around what does equitable recovery look like, and is equitable recovery enough? Is recovery enough? And how we might be able to reach beyond that. Anything you want to add around that, Holly?
Yeah, so I was thinking a lot about what Liz said about the term. I kind of isolated that term recovery and what that looks like and what that means to me. And I think that term, I mean, it implies that there was something to begin with, something there to get back to, or some sort of existing foundation, right? So when I think about how equitable recovery, like it applies to racial equality, I think that it can miss the mark in capturing really historical roots of trauma, the othering of individuals in our society, most notably, like, as you had mentioned, Evan, white supremacist ideology and those values that are so pervasive and so dangerous in our society. And I always try to think of, like, what does this look like tangibly in society right now? And the most timely thing I could think of was with COVID vaccine and the distrust of that vaccine in communities of color. And I know I had mentioned this in our planning meeting too. I've been thinking a lot about the rhetoric around that distrust, particularly from white communities and from healthcare communities. And it seems to focus on this idea that in communities of color, like, we are getting in our own way in regard to that distrust, when really that not trusting is so valid, because of the historical, examples we have throughout time of communities of color being maligned and treated poorly and unfairly and dangerously from healthcare. And I focus on that, but that's just one example of many different systems that have treated people of color and communities of color unfairly and dangerously. So, sorry, my thoughts are a little bit jumbled here. So
apologize. It's all good. You're giving us all the jewels. Please, anything else you want to add, Holly, please?
Yeah, and I just really wanted to hit home that it's not a conspiracy theory or a paranoia. It is so valid. And so in regards to what I think maybe equitable recovery may leave out, I think that we as providers particularly need to recognize that in building trust, we need to work from the ground up, because the trust was never really there in the first place. And I know that can sound harsh, but I mean, what basis do we have to believe that was there in the first place? So there's not necessarily some sort of huge foundation to get back to. I don't have the answer, but I think a good starting point in building that trust is taking a big step back, to listen and try to understand and to honor that experience and the stories of these individuals in these communities and this historical trauma and what has happened to them.
Thank you so much, Holly. Your words really resonate. And I think, if folks are interested to learn more or know more about what that breaking, John Powell, who, has taught so many of us about targeted universalism, and we've all learned so much from, he talks about the activities of breaking and bridging. And that breaking is really breaking down the trust of folks that you're trying to build community with, really breaking down relationships in negative ways. And that what we have have to try and seek to do is build bridges toward belonging. So I invite folks, if they want to know more about this, just a few things I know. I think the story of Henrietta Lacks is really important. I read that book in the hospital, and I was just, it was just, it was mind-blowing and life-changing for me. I really invite folks to learn about the Tuskegee experiments and what happened with that. Just the general history around Johns Hopkins Hospital and communities of color in that area. There have been, and so that I bring all this up to say that this mistrust of health institutions and healthcare systems really comes out of an instinct around survival. It comes out of an instinct around how do we make sure we stay safe, because we're not sure this doctor is operating in our best interest, or we're not sure that this nurse really understands that we're important. I've heard stories about, parents who they get that moment with the doctor when their kid's in the hospital hurt to say, not how is the kid doing, what is the treatment plan, but you have to understand this kid is important. He or she is a straight A student and they're beloved in their community, just so they can make sure that the doctor understands that there's family here that cares and that's watching, as a way of saving that person's life. And so I think these issues are so important. I think when we think about equitable recovery, we really have to think about that historical trauma and the idea of meeting people where they are in terms of, and acknowledging that trust is an issue and finding ways to language and speak to and address those issues of distrust to say, okay, well, how can we build trust? How can we build really good relationships? So thank you for that, Holly and Jackie and Liz. So important, so important. So I think we're coming a little bit to our time, and I want to make sure to leave time for some questions or some additional thoughts from others, because we don't necessarily have all the answers here. We're just offering some ideas. But want to ask the question about how we can create spaces of community care in the region, in Northwest Washington, and think about how we can bring community care into our workspace, how we can bring community care into our community space, where we start around that and what that looks like. And I'll just offer one idea that I think I also shared in the planning meeting. I've been following this organization called the NAP Ministry. And then, yeah, I see some like shaking heads. Maybe I'm not, oh, please forgive the dog outside. So I really encourage folks to check it out. So the NAP, just really quickly, the NAP Ministry is based in Atlanta and is thinking about sleep deprivation as a community issue, and that there really needs to be community solutions to sleep deprivation, because the sort of work culture has really broken down the critical rest that many of us need and lack. And so they've been doing research around this and been doing performance art of just setting up these beautiful spaces with beds, and just having people of color and people maybe you wouldn't historically think about as being well rested, just in the streets napping on beautiful beds and beautiful settings, right? To sort of change the status quo about workaholicism and sleep depression and stress, and just think about what it would be like if we all rested together. That's just one example of how someone is creating communities of care around rest. And so just want to probe our panel, and I think I'm going to come to Jackie first to kick us off on this last question around her thoughts on how we bring about community care in our communities, in our organizations, and where we start. Sometimes it's hard to know where to start. So I would love to hear from you, Jackie, and to speak to this point.
Yeah, thank you. I think it goes back to what's been shared. One is understanding our the design of our system, and so I'm sitting with those hard truths. I think that for us, for the question being community care in our organizations in our region, like how do we create the space? In that acknowledgement, right? It is going to be essential that we understand, again, so framing like a targeted universalism model is that that allows us to create strategies, right, to respond to the trauma. And we all have been exposed to, trauma, at different rates, some at earlier ages. And we know for certain that, individuals that have been exposed to childhood trauma, it rewires their brain. And so when in this design process, it's no longer acceptable for us to create strategies and programs without those that it impacts. So those that are closest to the problem, those that it really is centering those that are most vulnerable. And so I think, like, in short, that is one thing that we can do as individuals in moving forward. And to be consistent, I'll end with this quote, is that progress moves at the speed of trust. And so, like, trusting that, for a lot of us with lived experience, we are the experts. And so when it comes to solutions, that knowing that we are the solution. And I think that that's something that hasn't been done. And so I've shared this quote, and I've been sharing this quote from Colleen Echohawk, is that we have a once in a generation opportunity to do something transformational, to do something courageous. And so, yeah, I'll end with that.
Thank you, Jackie. So just to reiterate the theme, and then I want to go to Liz and then to Holly to wrap us up. But I really love the idea of, like, thinking about lived experience as expertise, and that bringing that into spaces, that maybe historically that type of experience hasn't been valued or hasn't been included, I think is beautiful. Particularly when we think about setting up systems of community care, it's like, well, let folks figure that, like, if we can find ways to bring folks together and have folks figure things out for themselves, they will be applicable to the people in the room. So I love that idea. Thank you for that, Jackie. And want to just shift to Liz and see what you would have to add to that, Liz, around what does how do we start communities of care? How do we bring communities of care into our workplace, into our neighborhoods, into spaces where maybe they haven't been historically, and how we start?
I may give us a hard place to start.
No problem.
I think that, again, I'm probably going to go back to the targeted universalism frame. I think that we have a tendency to think it's okay if most people have something, let's move on to the next thing. And so, as I think about what our opportunity is, it is about defining some universal goals and figuring out a way to get everybody there. I'm not convinced that 100% of the people who live in the North Sound region have access to clean running water. I'm not sure that 100% of the people who live in the North Sound region, well, I do know this, have access to broadband so their kids can be in school and they can, like, people can work remotely. And I think that as long as we're okay that most people have something and it's no longer a priority, I think we're missing the boat in terms of, like, how we get to whatever is the new stage that we're trying to get to. And I think about really kind of like two groups of people who probably know about those things more than others, and it's probably community health workers and, like, EMS. They're the ones that are actually going out and they know when they get to a home where somebody doesn't have running water. I think it's, like, stunning to think that we can't come up with strategies for something that simple that will transform lives. And so as I think about this, again, I'm going to do it recovery, I'm trying to sort through how do we identify some things that we can work on in concert to make sure that every household, every community has an equal opportunity to take part in whatever the recovery efforts are that come into play. And, we can't assume that every person who's on a bus is there because they weren't following the directions to stay home, when there are essential workers who are never thought of as essential workers who cannot survive without getting out of their house and going to do home care or housekeeping or personal care for another person who's frail or elderly in our communities. So, you know, I think that if we can come up with some ways to identify just a couple of universal goals that we're willing to do all the legwork on the strategies around, it would be profound.
Thank you for that, Liz. I mean, I think what you said really resonates, and it gets back to what I believe Jackie shared earlier around sometimes self-care is rooted in privilege, that to go out and buy the services and drive to the places and be at the things, you got to have the car and the money and whatever other, the child care and the village around you to be able to do that. And what about those that don't? And how are those folks more impacted? And how can we think about that? But also, how can we just think about all of us around care? Because whether you have the money to drive to the place and buy the thing and do the thing, perhaps there's other ways, better ways, more healing ways, more just ways to be in our world. And so thank you for that. Targeted universalism is definitely a theme. Check out Othering and Belonging Institute on the internet if you want to learn more, and just really appreciate all the activity in the chat, sharing resources, and somebody even put a quote from the NAP ministry. So already picking that up and running with it. Holly has the great privilege and light responsibility of being our last word. And so Holly, would love to hear from you about where we start with creating communities of care at work, in our neighborhoods. How do we sort of break the sort of social awkwardness to say, I need help, I need care. Can you please help me with this? And can we find ways to help each other? And so, Holly, how would you like to contribute to that piece and wrap us up?
Well, I was thinking about kind of Jackie's themes for today of spaces to heal trauma and how important that is. And I was thinking about how in June, Evan and Liz and Jackie know this, we started the that gathering for people of color in the community, and how that started. And I reflected on that and how that process went. And really the thing that I had struggled with initially was just knowing where to go to get resources for a healing space, to heal trauma for myself and to be with people that look like me. And I had already felt isolated in that. And so then not knowing where to go or who to reach out to or what to do felt even more isolating. And, I've mentioned this kind of origin story a lot, but, I had reached out to the ACH not knowing if they could meet that need, but it was, kind of a shot in the dark, so to speak. And they did meet that need in a number of ways. And so what I was thinking of is, having resources and contacts available for individuals to be able to express what they need, their ideas, and having those resources of how they can get those needs met very tangibly and in real time, and having some sort of network to make it known. Because it's hard. There's these little pockets of things. It's like you hear about it from somebody else, but it's not very well known in the community. So I was, thinking agencies or organizations that have the means and the ability, grassroots organizations that can help, plant seeds for different supports, things like that. Just those places that are ready and available to listen and help that we can know about. And so with that, as I talked about earlier, we have this group that we've started, that we've been meeting together since June consistently. And I wanted to share a little bit about that because I also want to have a chance to give some information about how to get people plugged in if they would like to. So yeah, like I said, since June, we've been meeting as a group of people of color in the community to get space together, a safe space for support and healing, resource sharing, idea sharing, just getting feedback. For me, it's been a really healing experience, a way to break through that isolation. And so as it's evolving and growing, I just really wanted to make that known and let people know that that's available for those that identify as people of color in the community. And we decided just all of Washington State, whoever wants to join that. And so it's in the chat box, the email, to get more information about that. And please feel free to share that with others too that might be interested as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Holly. So in full disclosure, I happen to also be a facilitator, perhaps the facilitator, perhaps later a facilitator with the community, the POC gatherings that we've been doing once a month. They take place on the third Wednesday of every month from 3:30 to 5. I dropped the email also in the chat for the group. Website soon coming. Thanks for the beautiful allyship of North Sound getting that done. Shout out to Hillary for your help on that. But I think I just want to say thank y'all. These beautiful panelists, Liz Baxter, Jackie Julian, and Holly Martinson for offering your ideas and your thoughts. Two, please check out the chat. There's so much interesting, helpful information. Thank you everybody for sort of jumping in and adding in, because I don't think or even perhaps our panelists have all the answers. We're really looking for ways in which we can work together and bring the little bit that I know with the little bit that you know, and figure out how we can and bring about the sustained change that we really want to see. And, thank you for listening. So with that, I'm not sure, Monty, how much time we have, but, if there's time, happy to, open up the space for questions or move on, whatever you think.
We can be flexible with time. So yeah, we're going to take a break here in just a minute. So maybe there's folks that want to speak up. I love the chat as you're suggesting. And we're going to do, Nicola, I think who's here, is going to lead us in a little bit of a stretch, which might be helpful.
Awesome. Okay, well, I'm grateful to be here. Thank you for the time. And I'll just turn it over to you, Monty. And if folks have questions or thoughts, please continue to use the chat.
That sounds great, Evan. In addition to the beautiful panel and the wisdom, it's been a real gift just this last hour. And thank you for just being so thoughtful and how you set it up, Evan, and kind of pulling the best out. So again, I don't want to keep the conversation going. I took like 5 pages of notes. There's a lot there. I think not only anchoring us in some hard truths, as Jackie said, but really fundamentally reframing how we think about equitable recovery. This is not about recovering to the status quo and to the trauma and to systems that have been dominated by white supremacy thinking, but just ending on these notes of possibilities and the resources that are in here. This is a moment of, I think, I have it in one of my, kind of courageous transformation. How do we move to this place? I'd love to continue to play that out a little bit as well. So what an amazing start to our time together. Just really beautiful, important sessions to kind of anchor the work of this partnership in. And Stacy Wegley, co-facilitator here, are you nearby?
I'm here and ready to go and eager to welcome Daryl. So appreciative that Daryl Hilaire of the Lummi Nation and Leadership for Children of the Setting Sun has joined us to continue this important conversation around stewardship. So hello and welcome, Daryl. I believe you still may have your mute button on. We're in good company because that's how I began the day as well.
Thank you. Hi, Scott.
Hi.
Everybody.
Welcome. Daryl, as we started into our session together today, Monty invited folks to reflect on stewardship and begin lifting up some of the words or feelings, notions that come up for them as they consider the word stewardship. And across the group, words like service, taking care of community, providing service or support without expectation of reciprocity and care for land and culture, and wondering if you might be additive to that conversation and share what's on your heart and mind these days around stewardship.
Well, I'd love to, and thank all of you for having me here today. Satsamtum Sunasnat, Daryl Hilaire, Chuck Lumison. I'm from Lummi, and stewardship is a translation for us in that we translate it into responsibility, and it goes a little bit further than that, in that responsibility is actually derived from the gifts that we are born into, are realizing as a person and as a people. And those gifts are to be shared. They're not yours. Your gifts, the gifts that you carry, are to be shared. That's your responsibility, whether that be to have a good voice, or ability to write, or ability to sing, an ability to gather the people. Those are gifts. And you have a responsibility towards those gifts that's inherent to who you are. And so it ends up being stewardship if you just kind of look at it as some kind of mechanical practice, but it comes from within. It comes from within that spirit that you carry. It's the spirit of gratitude. So that's the perspective that we carry as Lummi people, Coast Salish people. It's a practice. It's a practice that's reflected in our winter ceremonies. You know, we are winter ceremony people, and it's all about gratitude. It's all about sharing. It's all about giving thanks to the Creator in all living things for what we have here in this beautiful world that we live in. We're not above this world. We're not above all other living things. We're part of it. And the gifts come from that existence. It's not something to be bought or sold. It's something to be received and passed on. So when we talk about stewardship, I guess we have to remind ourselves that this is not merely a mental practice. You know, it comes from within. It's something that is a real humble undertaking, in that when you practice humility, then you know that there'll be times when you'll fail. But if you have humility, you'll get back up and you'll try again, and you'll carry on. So these things that we have to address today in terms of the political turmoil, in terms of what the weather is doing, the climate is doing, and the amount of hatred that we're experiencing in this world, we have to look inside now to see, well, what part of that am I going to play, and what is that part that I'm going to play? Is it for the good? And taking your gifts and applying it to what that good is in your own mind and your own heart, and then be brave enough to announce that to yourself and to your family and to the world eventually, that yes, this is where my stewardship takes place. So that's what I have to share about that. And you know, the other ways to look at it is that when we gather like this in our way, in the Coast Salish way, we look for the feedback from our circle, and the feedback that speaks to the good words that are being spoken. Skeno ait unsquall. We look for that. then we also look for all the work that our people do, the hands and the feet, and all the people that are carrying on in support of all of us here in the circle. So we look for that. We listen for that. Skein o white unstroit. And that means real good work, real good words. And then thirdly, we listen for what else is being said about us. Skein o white unswallowing. Good manner of being. Good manner of being. We look for that. And then we know that our gifts are being received, that our gifts are being shared in a good way, that they're taken home to their hearts so that we all can become better people because of what we've shared and the gratitude that we share with the people for them respecting you while you're on that floor or on that ground, doing what you know is best for the people. So that's what I have to say about, stewardship, and what that means to me and how we practice it and how we continue to do that this day. So,
yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Daryl, yeah, so much to sit with there, and picking up on you named both mindset and practice within that, and wondering what may be some of your additional thoughts about how we nurture, support, and spread, activate perhaps even, folks to live into their gifts and their responsibilities for stewardship.
Well, something I didn't know, but I practice, and it's something that was brought to light from a book. It's called Sand Talk, because the guy captured actually the kind of like the indigenous way, and then in most worlds we start with with the work. Then we start with the and then we go after the work. We go to the plan, and then then usually when things go wrong, then we share our heart, and then we kind of like ask for forgiveness, in the spirit. Well, in the indigenous way, it's actually we practice in opposite. We recognize spirit first to inform our heart, to make the plan, because our heart is in the plan, and then we go do the work. So I didn't know I did that until I read that, and that's how we do it at Lummi, and in most indigenous communities, they recognize spirit as a practice before anything else takes place,
Yeah, so beautiful, and love that folks might have a few moments to reflect on that and carry that with them, and that we'd like to take a couple of minutes to break back down into small groups of 2 or 3 and breakout rooms, and invite folks to consider a couple of questions. Thinking about, where in the North Sound region right now do we see a need for stewardship, and what are those opportunities before us to give thanks, to hear and see our hearts, to make a plan together, and to do the work as Daryl has invited. And I know Casey and Nika are working behind the scenes to get us set up to share that time together, and then look forward, Daryl, as folks come out and have an opportunity to reflect on some of their thoughts, for you to be additive and weave as you do so beautifully.
Thank you.
you get kicked out of your room?
So they put me in a room, but no one else was there. There were two other people, but they weren't there. So I just was like, well, I'm gonna leave that then. So.
Okay, I will put you in a new room.
Oh, cool. Thanks.
Do you know what room it said you were in?
I was with the fire department and a woman named Catherine Monty, I think. So I don't know what room that was, but they are not there.
All right, I will find it. It's just gonna take me a minute to
Cool.
go through all of them. Brianna, right? Yeah. You might have to select join.
Oh, okay.
Pop-up that comes up.
I do have an option that says breakout rooms.
Yeah, try clicking on that.
Okay, cool. It says room 17.
Yep.
Cool.
Hi, Jessica and Daniel. Folks are in breakout rooms for another couple minutes and then we'll be back.
Okay.
Thank you.
group
that we've hired yet?
Hello, welcome back. My goodness, it's wonderful to continue to see all of your faces, and hope you all had a perfect connect with yeah, some of your fellow North Sounders. I'm wondering if we might invite folks to take just a moment to start to share just a couple of highlights, a couple of headlines of what was coming up in each of your groups for where you're seeing the need for stewardship in the North Sound, and what are the opportunities that are before us. And Daryl, wondering if you might share out what the conversation was a bit in your group.
Yeah, I'm the least qualified guy to report out. I didn't say one thing, so Cedric did a good job.
Fantastic. Cedric, might we invite you to share a bit about?
I was going to say, Beverly, I don't want to speak for Beverly, so I'll do my best, but please jump in. I mean, one of the things we talked about was, so I think like so often happens, we just kind of riffed. I don't know that we answered the questions, but we sort of riffed on them. And just talked about like the social isolation that has occurred, I think essentially everywhere. But thinking about where that might have disparate impacts, you know, in the disability community. And I just shared a story about, I work at Unity Care, we're a community health center. And one thing I noticed in the spring last spring when we started our COVID screening outdoors, and we had, you know, tents and screeners, and you couldn't just walk in the building, was the people who would just come and hang out every day and sit out in our courtyard, especially when it was sunny, like today, and like in the spring it sometimes is. And just, it was so noticeable. And I just was reminded that we always had patients who come here for a social outlet, but when the lobby is full and busy, you don't really notice them. But when downtown is a ghost town and there's like 5 people who come and like bring their chairs and sit outside and just hang out all day, I just really left an impression with me. That was 8 months ago. So that's not gotten any better for people.
Right, yeah, really shining a light on sort of the opportunities that have been missed through our distance, our physical distance from one another. Beverly wanted to invite if there was something you'd like to layer on, or anyone.
Yeah, I would just add that other piece in thinking about what social isolation that people are experiencing now is something that many people in our community have been experiencing all their lives and for generations, that there has been removal and barriers, and so seeing that as the opportunity that we understand, that others understand now what that has been like for people, that there is some camaraderie, I guess, in that, and using our discomfort through that as well as an opportunity to reach out. I have the idea of even that we curate the relationships we have, that there's some of those that we want to spend more time and energy and focus on, that it can take more work, and that's absolutely why we're here.
Yeah. Thank you for those additions. Thinking of one of the things that Evan and the panel had offered, and that you've connected back to there, right? Sort of this additional opportunity for empathy in this space, and perhaps for having a greater sense as that light has been shined for around a number of the inequities. Wondering if there are others who might lift up what their group spoke about.
Well, I think Darren turned his camera off, but if you could turn it back on. Darren is down at a mass vaccination clinic at this very moment. And so our group, prior to him showing us what was happening, we're talking about COVID response and the community care that's already been coming, and that's something we don't want to lose. And so how do you take that collective action? And then Daryl just shared, see if I took a screenshot, but then Daryl shared, oh, there, Darren, there you are. Okay. Will you show us outside? I don't know if anybody can see. And if you take yourself off mute, I think we can see you.
Sorry, somebody told me to turn my video off because I was disrupting the event and causing issues. So I have to go into casual mode.
And now you're the hero, Darren. So I'll tell Cheryl not to say that.
Cheryl hurt my feelings. So this is called sunshine.
Sorry, Darren. You can. You can.
And I'm participating, really. I'm just multitasking. And, you know, guys don't do well multitasking. And I'm very comfortable with that aspect.
Wait, who's that guy behind you?
He's one of my favorite people. There he is. Yeah, he's helping facilitate our vaccination team here at the site. And then we actually have a sunny day. These volunteers and people have been out here for, well, this is like, I think, our third or fourth week now. And it's never nice. Pouring down rain, miserable, disgusting. But we are going to get through about 1,200 vaccinations today. And when we get more, we're in standby mode. But today's a very good day and we're happy about it.
Yay.
Good job, Darren.
Thank you, Darren.
Yes, stewardship in action. Terrific. Perhaps is there one additional group who might share what emerged for them, what was bubbling up?
So I wasn't in a group, but there's something that Darren and Nicole said that I really want to hold on to, or at least it's the way I heard it. You know, COVID has created opportunities for people to come together and do things they might not have already been doing. And I wonder how we hold on to that. I wonder how we hold on to that and build from that. So that we don't, again, it's the whole like not going back to how we used to do things, but building upon how we're learning to do things. So.
I kind of want to piggyback off that. We were talking about schools, and I hope that schools and school districts remember what happened during this time, because there are more opportunities. While many kids miss being physically at school, the distance learning has been really better for some students and faculty. So I hope we learn that education is important and we have to do it in an inclusive way, and what we've learned during this time should be carried on.
Thank you. Others?
I'll just add on to what Liz and Nicole said about going back to the basics and not overbuilding systems or initiatives. Liz had the example of the EMS, and Nicole was just talking, we were just talking about, you know, going back to the basics, and it can be something pretty simple, and not losing what we're doing today is a good place to start.
Thank you for that. Just a couple of pieces coming up in the chat. Yeah, double clicking on as a student. Yes. And Leandre, an area for stewardship during this vaccination period is how we can get the shots out to our seniors and others who are not able to drive. And in the spirit, Liz, of doing some of that braiding between the board meeting and this conversation, that was lifted up as well, right? And for example, during the second shot, what senior adults or others during that, you know, second vaccination may experience, and what might their needs be at home and when they're alone with some of the symptoms that arise as our bodies build immunity. Many things to be considering. Daryl, I'd love to bring your voice back in for several minutes if you have it to share, if there are some additional things on your mind based on what's coming up in the room and what you're hearing, what you're feeling.
Kind of piggybacking what Liz brought up, I think, you know, maybe post-COVID or whatever you want to call it, I think it'd be a good time to have a celebration. You know, celebrate the spirit of the work that each of us had done, or collectively or individually, to mark the time with that kind of celebration would be really healthy, I think. You know, that's a good practice to mark time, you know, the work of the people.
Yeah, and knowing that so many of the ways that we mark time have been things that have been missing for us during this time.
Yeah.
Welcome folks to continue to add in the chat if there are things that are coming up for them, or that come back in as we move to close out our time together today. And knowing there's a few moments ahead, and Monty, you'll be taking us into the well-being survey as we wrap up today.
Thanks, Stacy, and thank you so much, Daryl, for your thoughts and your examples, and love the idea of celebration marking time. As feels like it's hard to get a good sense of time these days. And so I'm going to real quickly just maybe connect a couple of dots as we continue to talk about well-being, and in particular, what does it look like to move towards equitable well-being, and kind of on the spirit of stewardship. Some of you may have remembered our colleague Shomava Shaha, who's actually going to be with us on Friday with the Wellbeing in the Nation Network, started to kind of lift up the vital conditions in this well-being survey. And I remember a number of you, when we were together that were at the January face-to-face meeting, joined Shoma, and we kind of introduced some of the vital conditions. And one of the definitions we use in the Wellbeing in the Nation is this idea that I think is really consistent with what we've heard earlier, that stewards are expanding the vital conditions for all people and all places to thrive. This idea of, as Liz has continued to kind of lift up, of what's universal. It's not good enough for some, but all people in all places thriving, no exceptions. And so want to look at well-being in that context. Next slide, please. And this is, you don't have to, there's numbers and a lot of pieces here. This slide is basically just indicating that thriving, which is one of the best indicators for really understanding well-being, who's suffering, who's struggling, who's thriving. Gallup's been measuring this, millions and millions of times over across the globe, looking at people from different kind of in their life course. And right now, that those numbers, for a lot of different reasons, were plummeting, and this was even pre-COVID. But this idea of thriving and how we measure it is quite sensitive to external shocks, but also things that are helping with us personally and otherwise. And so this slide is just a reminder of how we might think about using measurement in this idea of thriving as a little bit of a catalytic way of thinking about how we want to move from here to greater equity and thriving. And you can see on the right-hand side, there's a little line there with recovery. And I think the panel reminded us that we don't want to recover to a place that is just, at best for many folks, just a level of trauma or mild trauma, if not severe trauma. How do we move beyond that into a place of resilience, which is a word that I heard Holly use a couple of times, into a place of human thriving? And so this next slide is kind of a bit of a way of thinking about well-being, from two perspectives. So one is to think about it personally. Basically all of us have our own individual perspectives around how we think, feel, and function. And we're going to actually offer up one of the ways to measure that and give you a flavor of that if you're willing to jump into that here in a moment. And of course, that rises and falls from day to day and from life to birth. And then there's our surroundings, our environment, our place. And one way of looking at that is both, do people have the services and the needs that they have? They can be met in a lot of different ways when they experience adversity. And what are those deeper vital conditions that we all need that are really the properties of place and institutions in order for us to thrive? So these two ideas of our individual perspectives and our vital conditions are one way of looking at, and actually one way of kind of measuring and being intentional about tracking that. So the next slide. When we were together in January, and you've probably seen different versions of this, these vital conditions for well-being, and happy to continue to share some of those out that are being adopted in a lot of different ways. That include our thriving natural world, the basic needs for health and well-being, which includes access to routine care, but it's also freedom from exclusion and trauma and violence, and access to affordable and healthy food. It includes lifelong learning, the things that happen in the first 1,000 days of life to our very last days. What does lifelong learning look like? What does meaningful work? What does dignified work look like? What does reliable work like? Work that gives us purpose, and all the different ways that it might happen. What does humane housing look like? There's different ways of looking at it, and reliable transportation. So these kind of constitute those underlying systems, those vital conditions that, again, as was said earlier, our systems right now are not designed so that everybody thrives. Far from it. And in a period of crisis, we're seeing, as those vital conditions are not being met, smaller and smaller numbers of individuals and families and of our population are thriving, and we see the growing demand for urgent services that in many ways aren't being met either. And so the question and the opportunity, I think, I think courageous transformation that Jackie brought up is, how might, this region and the relationships and the assets start to move to a place where we're starting to create some of those universal thresholds by which all people in all places are thriving in this region. So pieces that are within reach for this region over time. Next slide. So I'll just kind of hold up one region that we've been learning and working with over time that you may have heard a little bit about, is Fox Cities, which is in Wisconsin, about 8 or 9 counties, a place that has a lot of paper mills and has incredible and growing inequities by race and by class that they've been wrestling with. And they decided that they wanted to do something about thriving. And they as a starting point, started to kind of use these well-being surveys, which I'm going to share with you in just a moment. But surveys are just that. I mean, they are blunt instruments, but they started to kind of help them start to think about who was struggling and who was suffering and thriving, and what was behind that. What were the stories, and really to engage in meaning making and bringing, lived experiences and voices that have largely been left out. And the short of it is, through their process of kind of repairing and rebuilding relationships and being curious with each other, they've been on their own journey of what really belonging looks like, and starting to recognize where they've engaged or been complicit in othering. And they're doing a lot of really interesting work at a neighborhood level around how they start stitching together belonging across the lines that divide them, as well as some work around food systems. But they've recognized some value in basically being super intentional around tracking and measuring well-being, thriving, struggling, suffering, and making meaning of that together. And since that's something that this region has started to adopt, we thought it might be an area that the North Sound might want to think about how it could be a little bit more intentional around how it measure, tracks, and then act on what it learns about who's suffering, struggling, and suffering. So next slide. So we're a little ahead of time, which we were hoping to be. And what I'd love to do is invite you all to actually take this survey. It will probably take 4 or 5 minutes. If there's some reason why you don't feel comfortable doing that, that's fine. The results are not going to be shared, your individual responses. But we thought if it's an area that you all might want to explore, and the Data for Change group and some others have been looking at this. And tomorrow we're going to hear from Shoma Shaha as well as Providence around how they've been using the well-being surveys and these measures as a way to be more intentional. So this is a little bit of a setup for you all to kind of experience that.
That would be day after tomorrow.
Thanks. So I just, for what it's worth, this idea of thriving, struggling, and suffering, that comes from a really strong social science indicator that is really highly predictive of how we think, feel, and function, what we'll do in groups. And we can share more background on that. And it's one of the measures that you're going to take in this survey around kind of best possible life now, how you're feeling. And a lot of us may be feeling down in different ways, more so than before for obvious reasons. And then it also allows us to kind of predict where we think we're going to be in the future. And so that is just that kind of interesting measure. And I just want to emphasize that there's a lot of different ways of kind of creating a more holistic portrait of our well-being, our spiritual, our physical, our social, our financial, all the different kind of dimensions of a more holistic view of ourselves and our community. So the survey will take about 4 or 5 minutes. So I'm going to invite you to go ahead and we'll just kind of close out, and however long you would like to take to do that. And the other piece I just wanted to mention is that on Thursday, actually tomorrow, we're not meeting as a full group tomorrow, that will be on Friday. But if for some reason something kind of comes up for you as you're thinking about your own well-being, that you want to talk through that with an individual or a group, or have questions in the survey that can't wait till Friday, we just have a little bit of time held tomorrow between 10 and 11, where a handful of us will just be on there to talk through any of the pieces around well-being for you. But in the meantime, just want to thank you all, and particularly the group that helped set up this day and helped lead portions of it, and for all of you who've been present with each other in the chat for an amazing day. And I think it sets us up really well for Friday. Liz, is there anything else you wanted to mention, or Nicole?
Probably the only other thing I'm going to mention, because, it'll be a part of Friday. I think I mentioned earlier, we're trying to interweave the board discussion with this access to partners. So tomorrow is the second part of a board learning session. And out of that, we're actually trying to figure out what would the board like to learn from you. And so on Friday, when we meet, we're going to be bringing some of that forward so that you actually can also be feeding some information and insights back to the board. So it's a first to try and weave these together, but we're going to attempt to do that. So we're really looking for as many of you that can join on Friday. I think it's going to be awesome to have the second part of this session. So thank you just for carving out this time, because I know that every time you do that, it's asking a lot, but this has been an awesome afternoon. So thanks.
Yep. Thanks, Liz. So again, the link is in there. I know some of the CI team will continue to stay on. So after you've completed the survey, feel free to enjoy the rest of the sunlight of your day. And thanks so much for all that you do.